China has overtaken Europe and America as Africa's biggest trading partner. The West worries about a challenge to its influence. But how should Africa respond? In the second of two special reports, Sorious SAMURA goes in search of the good governance the continent needs to exploit this new rivalry for its resources.
Divide and rule. This is how European powers carved up the African continent at the end of the 19th century. It was a negotiation between European gentlemen to deal out the resources of Africa for their own benefit. New African states were defined not by the tribes who lived within these drawn borders, but by how much these lands could enrich their new masters. These lines left deep and painful scars from which Africa is still recovering. 120 years later, African governments, now independent, still struggle to negotiate proper returns for the valuable resources that the rest of the world needs. For ordinary Africans, these are critical deals, but some African governments are starting to deliver. These ruins are all that remain of the old colonial seaport here in Accra, the capital of Ghana. Where Europeans once came to extract slaves and gold, today Ghanaians are driving their own economy with even more gold, oil and cocoa, and building a nation that has become one of the leading lights on the continent. Ghana has always been at the forefront of history in Africa, the first country to start trading with the West, the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to win the battle for independence. Today, it looks like it's also winning the battle for good governance. This country is being hailed as a success story in Africa. But what does that mean? I'm here to find out. Today, it is not the European powers making business headlines in Ghana. It's the Chinese. China's trade with Ghana is now greater than the US. In 2012, the Ghanaian government signed a total of $13 billion in infrastructure deals with China, representing 33% of Ghana's GDP. But the Chinese are not finding it quite as easy as their European predecessors once did. Now, the Ghanaian people demand more from the deals their governments strike with foreign partners. Ghana is one of Africa's most successful democracies, and the government is under close scrutiny from its own people. This protest at the beginning of July was organized by a 26-year-old lawyer, Nana Akwesi, in response to a deepening economic crisis that has gripped the nation since the beginning of the year. This is Ghana's democracy in action.
It was a clarion call to all Ghanaians all over the country, outside the country as well, to join us in demanding responsible governance and accountable governance. The 1992 Constitution includes freedom of expression, freedom of association, and freedom of the media. We are guaranteed of that constitutional right to embark on such protest, to send a message to government that your people, our people, the Ghanaian people are suffering.
Responsible governance.
This young lawyer has formed a new civil society group called Concerned Ghanaians for Responsible Government. They believe the government is failing to get the best deals for its people.
We have a relationship with the West, which we tend to say is unequal, it's uneven, we've been cheated. And we've maintained that relationship. And now we are developing relationships with the East, basically along the same lines. I mean, I think it's time for us to define our own interests properly.
We have all the natural resources and we have all the, other things that most of them need to develop their own economies. But what we haven't yet been able to negotiate for is the benefits that come with those kinds of relationships.
We go contracting loans, the interest of which drown us. We have debts that we have not been able to pay and we may never be able to pay. The contracts that we enter with the countries that should be our development partners, we end up getting the wrong end of the stick, if you want to call it that.
China's increasing influence brings into focus the ability of African governments to negotiate better deals in a new and competitive environment. And here in Ghana, that's brought pressure from civil society and opposition parties, which has forced the government to reconsider some of the agreements with the Chinese. A $3 billion oil for loan agreement has been capped at $1.5 billion. Considered a victory for opposition opinion in Ghana, what this represents to me is a robust and healthy democracy with a government that responds to its people. Kofi Bentil was at the protest in July and is vice president of one of the country's leading think tanks, Imani Ghana.
I can say with a lot of confidence that our governance is better because civil society is listened to in Ghana. Our governance is better because civil society makes its voice known forcefully enough, and governments are learning that there is a consequence for ignoring civil society. And that is what has led us to the present position. Is I have to give credit that our governments right now allow a lot of freedom of expression, and that has given a base for civil society groups like myself and people like me to be able to speak freely and not be afraid that there will be repercussions. But again, we have had to fight to get this, and people really faced the barrel of a military dictator. Okay, stared him in the face and said, "We want democracy," and we Ghanaians really treasure that right.
So this strong democracy didn't come about by accident. It is the result of a particular struggle. The great happiness that came with independence in 1957 was short-lived. In less than a decade, a coup driven by one of the country's tribes brought Ghana into a period of political turmoil that lasted until 1992, when the country returned to constitutional rule. This victory for democracy was down to people like this man, Kweku Baku. He was on the front line of the battle for good government in Ghana. But he fought not with a gun, but with a printing press and a bunch of dedicated journalists. He was imprisoned many times, spending over 2 years in jail for his principles.
He took a hell of a battle. Had a lot of problems in terms of the legislative instruments that were used to suppress the media left, right, center, journalists going to prison left, right, center. So it was a hectic time. But as I said, there was a collective will too of Ghanaians to fight to restore constitutional normalcy.
So clearly the media has played a very significant role in terms of good governance and development in this country.
Without the Ghanaian media and its posture, its advocacy, its fearlessness, its critical mind, I'm not too sure Ghana will be a democracy today. Even up to today, it keeps the government on its toes. It keeps state institutions on their toes. Even private businessmen and entities are kept on their toes because of the kind of media we have in this country.
My journey across Africa over the years has led me to believe that development is not just about building roads, bridges, or hospitals. It's not just about infrastructures. It's about the values of our societies. It's about accountability, transparency, and the honesty of our governments. What this country, Ghana, has done is that it's allowed the press to operate freely, civil society to thrive, and when you allow things like this to operate, good governance does come out of it. And for me, this gives me confidence that Ghana is on the right track. Ghana's democracy may be strong, but with the economy showing real signs of difficulty and civil society demanding better deals for the country's resources, challenges clearly remain. I spoke to the country's president. Mr. President, you have a lot of people who are saying they are worried, they have concerns, they are demonstrating here and there, and they're saying that they are concerned that the country might slip back to those dark days. What are you going to do to make sure that this country doesn't go down that road?
I think that Ghana's democracy is entrenched, and I believe that our society has the kinds of institutions and also has the kinds of pressure valves that allow people to vent. And that is part of the strength of democracy, that if people feel strongly about something, they're able to demonstrate. The fact that people are demonstrating does not mean that society is going back. We've had to take tough measures to adjust the economy in order to bring down the deficit and bring down inflation. I've explained that the alternatives to taking those strong measures would have been worse if we did nothing, because then we could suffer an economic meltdown, and that would create even more suffering and hardship for workers.
Don't you think that Africa's problem, the fact that we always allow outsiders to come and take the raw material and add value for us, has been part of Africa's problem? Is Ghana doing anything to start looking within and adding values on their own natural resources?
Indeed, that was the theme of my last State of the Nation address. I said that it was time for us to transform the structure of the economy. The economies we inherited were what were bequeathed to us by our colonial masters. We were supposed to be the producers of raw materials, which were exported to the colonial metropoli, and then they fashioned them into finished goods and re-exported them back to us. And so we need to break that structure. I mean, why should we, 57 years after independence, continue to export gold in its raw form when we could set up a refinery to refine that gold? And when you refine gold, the value of exporting it fetches you far more money than when you export raw bullion. And so there's a lot that we can do, and this government is determined to do.
Despite recent economic hardships, Ghana has continued to strengthen and grow over the last 20 years. The prize is contained in the stories of people like Felicia, a young woman from a single-parent family who grew up without enough to eat, who now owns her own home.
So I grew up with my mom, who was very hardworking, and she started selling second-hand clothes. Even what to eat was a problem, and she has to pay for my fees. She took us to one of the best schools. My mommy believed in education. I did very well, and I think it was there opportunities started opening for me after the university. And since then, life has been good, I guess.
But it's not just a miracle. How did you get to this position where you are now?
My husband has been very supportive, and I told him how much I had struggled and how I want to change things in my life and that of my mom. That was when we decided to get this place. I didn't have a problem having to forgo certain things. I was focused, I was determined. We encouraged each other, and lo and behold, we are here today.
It is stories like Felicia's that for so many poor people around the world is the modern dream. And Ghana itself embodies that dream. A country that has arisen from daily struggle to peace and relative prosperity in a single generation. Ghana has become an example to the rest of Africa for its commitment to free and fair democratic institutions, and for developing a tradition of democratic leadership that is more capable of standing up for the interests of its own people. Yet poverty remains widespread here and across the continent, and leaders are still struggling to turn trade in the continent's vast mineral resources into material wealth for their own people. I'm now living for a country on the edge of a desert, where that is exactly what good governance has achieved. I've always wanted to come to Botswana. For me, this country stands out from the rest of the continent. Since independence, they've had no war. It's been really stable, very strong economy, good governance, and very little corruption. I really want to find out what it is that they got so right that the rest of us can learn from. Here, they have been blessed with the most precious mineral of them all, diamonds. And through exceptional management of these resources and forming proper, decent partnership with outsiders, Botswana has gone from being one of the poorest countries in the world at independence in 1966 to one of Africa's first middle-income countries. Jwaneng is the richest diamond mine in the world and is the primary source of Botswana's wealth. Diamonds in Botswana were discovered 1 year after independence in 1967 by geologists from De Beers, the South African diamond mining giant. Over a 6-year period, the government negotiated a fantastic deal. De Beers paid around 70% of the value of each diamond they found to the government of Botswana, and that money was spent wisely. The partnership became Debswana, and Balisi Bonyongo is the managing director.
The forefathers came up with this partnership that has literally stood the test of time. And with that, the government of Botswana made a decision from start that the revenues that are going to flow out of these diamonds will be for the nation. Corruption and greed is something that must be out. And having read and studied a lot about Africa, it looks like it's about my pocket first. We can't continue lining our pockets while our malnourished kids continue to suffer, yet the resources are on the ground. This country is a prime example of selflessness at the top, and therefore it makes all of us become followers of such pioneering leadership.
It is good news from Africa, but it makes me sad too. My own country, Sierra Leone, is also blessed with diamonds, but greed and corruption drove us into an 11-year civil war. My people remain some of the poorest in the world. It is a fate that has befallen millions in resource-rich countries across the continent. In Botswana, they are not only striking good deals for mining revenues. Since 2006, the government negotiated an agreement for De Beers to bring all processing of Botswana's diamonds from London. So the country now benefits not only by selling its raw materials, but by producing finished goods. This is it, Botswana's blessing. These are the precious stones that have paved the way for this country from being one of the poorest to one of the strongest economies on the continent. But without good governance, these stones would have yielded nothing. And for me, what is crucial is this building, which has now done what most of Africa has failed to do, add value to our natural resources. Botswana's first president after independence, Sorious SAMURA, was not only a visionary leader in joining the diamonds in the ground to the welfare of his people. He did something else extraordinary. He joined the tradition of tribal leadership with modern democracy, adapting both to meet the needs of his country. Instead of tribe being used to divide and rule, as it has in so many African countries, here it is a source of unity.
Jesus is coming to rule in righteousness. Jesus is coming to rule. The Lord Jesus is coming to rule. The Lord Jesus is coming to rule.
Mosadi Siboko is the chief of the Baleti tribe in southern Botswana. She is one of 8 tribal chiefs known as Kosi, who are responsible for managing the tribe, settling disputes, and administering customary law through the traditional process of communal governance known as the Kotla system. Together, the COSI formed the core members of the National House of Chiefs, an advisory body within the Parliament of Botswana. The COSI's power is hereditary, as it has been for centuries, but is subject to the powers of the democratically elected government.
The founding father of our democracy, that was Sorious SAMURA, our first president, was actually born a chief. So he understood the basis of the Kotla system and the chiefs to be the culture of Botswana. What he meant was, let's continue with the system of chieftainship and let's link it with modern democracy. And let's not throw away our traditions and our cultures. So at the Kotla, everybody speaks, and this is what we call freedom of speech. And that is something that Botswana is renowned for.
This tribal system is how people in Botswana have been solving problems for centuries. By keeping it, the country has been able to adjust gradually from tradition to modernity. By looking within for the answers and not simply adopting wholesale the systems of outsiders, Botswana has now enjoyed almost 50 years of unbroken peace, prosperity, and democratic rule since independence. Botswana's quiet confidence in its own way of doing things is also reflected in its dealings with China, who are busy building infrastructure here too. This airport was being built by a Chinese company, but when they failed to work according to the government's rules, the contract was terminated. Unlike most African countries, Botswana is more cautious about the free-flowing cash from the East. Dikagiso Mokotedi is the permanent secretary to the Ministry of Infrastructure.
So the Chinese have certainly brought us soft loans, but there's also an element where as a country or as a continent, we've got to be careful, because if the loans which we are getting, soft as they may be, have got stringent attachments to them, which now undermine our participation in our own development, is something which as a country we are also watching very, very carefully to make sure that there's a balance, so that even if you are asking for assistance, but there must be a recognition that that assistance must be a partnership where we are also participating in what is happening. We cannot forever as a continent depend on outsiders to be doing things for us, but they rather assist us so that we are able to do things for ourselves.
So at last, this is what both good governance and real independence in Africa looks like. Here, the battle for Africa has been won. I spoke to President Ian Khama, son of the country's founding father, Sorious Khama.
We shouldn't, as a country or as a continent, put all our eggs in one basket. Of course, China has been able to get a foothold because if you talk about the West, for example, they usually have fairly stringent criteria before they want to do business with you. And that has really forced many countries in Africa to look elsewhere. And China doesn't have the same qualms about a country's governance and status of democracy because of their own situation. So they are willing to come in and try to make the best out of it as they can, also for their benefit. But anything that you do should be a win-win situation in dealing with any country, whether it's China or anybody else.
What's independence giving Africa? Pride, maybe, but what happened to our dreams? Divide and rule was how the colonialists ruled us, and what has followed them since independence has been decades of corrupt, it's my turn to eat governments, which have, if anything, deepened the inequalities that we inherited from our colonial masters. Here in Botswana, they have looked within for the answers and not outside from our foreign partners. What will it take for the rest of my continent to win their true independence? That dream we all imagined half a century ago.